Good evening. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great pleasure to warmly welcome you to this yearly Schumann lecture. And I'm sure it's going to be a very exciting lecture. And I want to give the floor to Mrs. Mieke Damsma, and she is Alderman of Education of the city of Maastricht. And she will, Elderwoman, yeah. And she will introduce the honorable guest speaker of tonight to you. And after the lecture there is room for discussion and debate, so keep your questions. And this debate will be moderated by Mr. Martin Paul, and he is the president of our university. Mieke Damsma, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Not only Alderman, but this evening, Deputy Mayor, because the Mayor of Maastricht has a few days of holiday. That's why I'm the one who is standing here today, this evening for you. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm delighted to welcome you to 20th Schumann Lecture. This is an annual scholarly event organized by the Maastricht University Studium Generale in collaboration with the city of Maastricht. The Schumann Lecture is named after the former French Foreign Minister and Prime Minister Robert Schuman. After the Second World War, he was a strong advocate of reconciliation between France and Germany. As such, he was one of the founders of modern-day Europe. Moreover, he was a driving force behind the setting up of the European Coal and Steel Community. Today, the 7th of May 2014, all that may seem like history. But Robert Schumann's legacy is still very evident in Maastricht, and perhaps now more than ever. Ladies and gentlemen, the subject to our speaker will address today fits in seamlessly with the contemporary developments in the EU-region Meuse-Rhine. We are discovering more and more frequently in this international region that economic development does not always drive cooperation. Cultural similarities based on historical awareness contribute more to the development of our EU region these days. People are the key factor in all this, and people are about more than economic growth and development. Trade and work are important preconditions for the growth of a city and region, but they have their limits too. And now that we have reached our economic limits, our task is to shape the ongoing development of our region through culture. In my opinion, the speaker for the 2014 Schumann Lecture is the right person to hold a mirror up to our society in these times of economic and cultural change. I therefore hope that everyone here tonight listens with an open but critical mind. It only remains for me to introduce this evening's speaker. He is a chief macroeconomic strategist at CSOB, one of the largest Czech banks. He is a member of the Narrative of Europe group, and he is the author of the international bestseller Economics of Good and Evil. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm delighted to welcome Thomas Sedlacek.
Well, actually, I know. Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be here. I have noticed three very strange things since I came here. First of all, it shocked me that some of you have the same shirt until I realized that it is the same shirt of the university. Ah, good. So I got that one. That's the first one. Second, you have very young elders, which came as a second surprise. And thirdly, we've always been tortured by these Maastricht criteria until today, visiting this city for the first time, I discovered that it's actually a very nice town. So those are three new things for me. Let me take about an hour of your time, and I will have a monologue. But I would much rather, of course, if you interrupt me, we will have half an hour for debate later on. But in the meantime, if there is anything that you like to say, with an open mind, then, please say it. This is bullshit, doesn't make any sense. Or if you, I don't know, if an idea comes to your mind, you shouldn't keep it to yourself. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Good. Okay.
If going to be a problem, let me know.
If it's a problem, let me know. Okay. So first of all, being here, celebrating, having the honor of celebrating it, talking about in the lecture of one of the founding fathers of European integration. The reason why I called the lecture European Revolution is because, in my opinion, this is one of the biggest revolutions we've had in Europe, comparable to the revolutions, perhaps the bloodier ones, which we had in France and elsewhere. Why is it? Why is it such a big thing? Well, because the founding fathers have really managed to swap fetishes. So before our time, the fetish of our forefathers, our grandparents, was it was a growth of a nation geographically. For reasons that today are very difficult to understand, it was something that we fetishized to the point of killing each other over land. Today, nobody cares about that. I mean, if to be politically correct, I will make fun of my own country. I have noticed that there is somebody greeted me in Czech. How many Czech people do I have here? One? Oh my God, so I have to be really careful. I have a very active censorship. Or maybe I should do it in Czech. Jo? Tak pár slov česky? Okay. No, so if somebody came to Czech Republic and offered half of Poland to us, we have enough of our own troubles, why should we, why? This is something that's absolutely not sexy, not important for us. 2 generations ago, we would literally kill each other, not in sort of a metaphorical meaning of the word kill. Today we kill over pizzas and things. But we literally killed each other, shooted each other until blood came out. So this was a fetish of our forefathers that is very difficult to understand. So so the question is, how about Putin? This is a great example. This is why it's such a great disappointment. We suddenly woke up in a world where actually you argue with tanks. This is something, especially for my country, extremely important, because in the whole 90s, all we tried to do is to get out of no man's land. I called it no man's land. After the collapse of the Soviet regime, there was a no man's land between European Union and Russia. That's where, unfortunately, Ukraine got stuck. And they don't know whether they want to go to Russia or whether they want to go to Europe. Talk about Ukraine, this is actually a very, very good point, because for the first time in the history of Europe, we are actually having people in the streets doing a revolution for European Union. This has never happened in the history of European integration, that people would actually be standing in the cold, in the rain, at the threat of a gunshot because they believe that they belong to European Union. So unfortunately, this happened to a country which is not a member, and it's Ukraine. But nevertheless, the more important this is for us because we in Europe seem to be, in European Union, seem to be fiddling on so high levels of the Maslow pyramid of needs, we don't realize everything that Europe is because we take it for granted. President Barroso has commissioned around 14 intellectuals to come and try and put their heads together. What is the meaning of Europe? What's the narrative of Europe? What's the story of Europe, that it's not just curved bananas and negotiations between this party and that party? And like all questions about meaning, it was very difficult to come with the answer. If you ask anybody, any philosopher about the meaning of life, it's a very difficult question to answer. The questions of meaning, or telos, in the Aristotelian tradition are extremely difficult to answer, unless, of course, you have a computer that can calculate the meaning of life, universe, and everything, which is, thank you. I can see that I'm among educated public. So it was very difficult for us to point out the values of Europe, or the meaning of Europe, or the purpose of Europe, or the story of Europe. And in the middle of our writing, the events in Ukraine sort of came to our help, if I can use that. And suddenly we realized this is what's European about Europe. So if you look on Ukraine, Ukraine is in Europe. So is Moscow, by the way. Geographically speaking, Ukraine is in Europe as much as Netherlands is. But they are gathered in the streets and they are wanting to enter Europe. So what does that exactly mean? You are in Europe, but you want to go to Europe. This was the same thing that we had in my country in 1989, where people were standing in the streets of Prague, and one of the key posts that we had above our heads was "Back to Europe." We want to go back to Europe. Now, Czech Republic is in the center of Europe as much as it gets. So what is the meaning of a European country doing a revolution about we want to go back to Europe? Well, it's being able to say whatever you want to say and not being afraid of being persecuted for it. That's something that we did not have in my country 25 years ago. That's why we drink so much. It's really a cultural phenomenon. We survived communism thanks to pubs. Because in pubs you could really say anything you wanted, and if there was a traitor, an informer, somebody who would tell on you, on the authorities, you could always say, well, I had one beer too many, I don't or more than one. I don't properly remember what I said, and this was considered, interestingly enough, a legitimate excuse. Okay, so that really, in a way, was a huge inspiration for us, because that is the meaning of Europe. We take these things for granted. Walking down home without being afraid of being raped is also something that you can only enjoy in Europe. Having the ability to be so critical over democracies that we find Europe not to be democratic enough. Give me another body in the world that's more democratic than Europe. Or in other words, give me another system that you would like to have here. Would you like to have the American system? Would you like to have the Chinese unification system? Would you like to have the African or Japanese? Or what else is there? This is also one of the sort of the happy curses that we have in Europe, is that we really lack a model to be inspired. We don't know who to follow, which is, of course, in one way bad news, but you can also read it as good news, is that there is really nobody ahead of you. It's very difficult to find a model with which we, very complicated Europeans, would be happy with. And of course, one of the models, or actually the only model that we sometimes mention, is United States of America. Now, there the situation, of course, is a little different because you know that in America the support for the Union is much higher than we will ever get in Europe. It's actually not so difficult to understand. We have Captain America in the movies right now. If you ask Captain America about America, he will go like this. If you ask Kafka about Europe, you know, he will not go like this. And we're much more a nation of, rather, nations of Kafkas than Captain Americans. I'm only using this very highly academic example because Captain America is in the movies right now. So that's also something that we need to bear in mind. We will never, ever be enthusiastic about anything political in Europe. This is not even an option. We'll always be critical, like Kafka always will be critical. I mean, ask Kafka about bureaucracy. He will, you know, spot these small little details that we didn't even notice. It was thanks to him that we are so critical about all these sort of bureaucracies. Which brings me to another point. I believe, and I will maybe surprise you, those of you who know my writing, it may come as a surprise. I actually believe in the invisible hand. But not of the markets, I believe in the invisible hand of the society. Somehow, the society as a whole is able to self-regulate, is able to sort of, you know, survive and be here, and somehow the society has higher intelligence than the sum of individuals acting in it. So as an example, if the society becomes too bureaucratic, for example, Kafka will be born, and he will tell us, you know, there's a castle, and it's, you know, it's not a nice thing to, and he will give us a massive loads of literature to be arm's length when it comes to bureaucracy. When we will become too corporate, hippies will be born. When we become too doped, European Union will, you know, sort of, come and correct us. So there is some sort of dynamics that go around in the society that you could liken to an invisible hand, which sort of regulates us. That's why also one of the reasons why we as humanity are still here, that there is something in the society that can regulate it. How it happened that this self-regulation that belongs to the whole society was privatized by markets only is a big question. I think that would make a fine bachelor or maybe even master's thesis, is this question: why don't we talk about the invisible hand of artists, or the invisible hand of cheesemakers, or the invisible hand of education? What regulates education? It's definitely not the markets, but it still somehow functions. So there must be some regulatory hand there, but nobody's given it a name. Which brings me to another topic, is exactly that we have this tendency in our age to fetishize economic. Which brings me back to the introduction of my talk today. The genius of the founding fathers of European integration was exactly that they managed to swap the fetish of national growth geographically for a fetish of national growth economically. Because one way to look at GDP is today considered to be a very exact statistic. It's considered to be what they call a hard statistic, and most laughably, it's considered to be a fact. Now, you can also look at it sort of from a structural point of view, and you can also say, well, isn't GDP, in a way, a remnant of nationalism? Because we measure our success in national terms. And we measure it one country up against another country and up against our own path. Now bear with me for a moment and just imagine for a second that we would measure GDP not in the national terms, but in, for example, regional terms. This is not difficult to do. In fact, this is already being done. Only the difference between regional GDP and national GDP is that regional GDP has not been fetishized while national GDP has been. Let me immediately give you an example. So if we measure GDP regionally, this post-Second World War Germany versus Greece would immediately disappear, because immediately it would be clear that some regions in Greece would be fiscally supporting some regions in Germany, because there are regions in Greece that are much richer than some regions in especially Eastern Germany. So while, so the whole what you had in the newspapers 2 years ago, you know, Second World War, and you attacked us with this, and now we're paying you back, all this sort of Nazi remnants, came out exactly because GDP is a remnant of capitalism, of nationalism. Because I just flew back from United States of America just about half an hour or hour ago, and I watched, because I watched all the movies that I could, I also watched the Lego movie. And there the main villain is Mr. Business, which to me is going a little bit, you know, too far right there, but that's why the word capitalism came, which I will have to think about that in Freudian terms before I go to bed. But what I really meant was nationalism. Let's take another, maybe even more extreme example is, let's imagine that we measure GDP according to some other dividing line, for example, males versus females. Also, technically, not a problem. The discourse, however, would completely change, because immediately we would have newspaper articles and debates such as this one focused around, okay, so in 2013, the GDP of males went down by 2.4%, while the GDP of women went up by 4.2%. Now what shall we do? Shall women be fiscally solidary and send funds to these always lazy men? You know, how shall we come up with new rules, with new incentives to get men more working and women less? That would be the debate that we would have. You could also split the GDP measure according to blondes versus black-haired people, and the ones who would be measuring this would be redheads. And you will of course say, of course, this is absurd, and I would agree with you, it is absurd, but what's more absurd about this than measuring GDP in national terms? It's just a habit that we got, for historical reasons, used to. So that's my first point. Even though GDP appears to be an exactly sort of a hard fact, it's only a fact because we are immersed in mythology of national economies. In fact, there is no such thing as a national economy. Things get rarely produced in one country alone, but we are so immersed in this historical habit, we consider GDP to be a fact. So that's my first point. Second point, what you measure predictates the dividing lines. So only because we measure GDP, suddenly there was this north-south divide, which was the most stupid thing that was ever invented in my lifetime. Because last time I checked, Ireland, which went bankrupt, one of the first countries, wasn't exactly situated on the south. And just to make matters even more funny, nor was Iceland. You know, Iceland is really in the north. You can only get it, it's almost impossible to argue that Iceland is in the south. Although, you never know, some disputants are more genius than others. So you have this divide between the hard-working north and the lazy south. which again is born only because the way we measure things. So the way you measure things is never neutral, nor is it never objective. It's always a product of some narrative, of some historical development, which could have, of course, been developed completely differently. Why is this important in this debate about Europe? Well, we almost crumbled down Europe because the way we measure GDP. If we measured it regionally, if we measured it according to hair color, this debate about getting rid of Greece or helping Greece by kicking it out of the Eurozone would never, ever even be born. You will say, well, you know, this is not really practical, but yes it is. In America, they don't measure GDP of California vis-a-vis the GDP of, I don't know, Texas. And consequently, it's actually quite funny because we Europeans, we usually have this image that we Europeans are the more relaxed, the more artsy, the more postmodern, while in America, they are the ones who are very business-minded, very economical, and you know, tough when it comes to business. But when you look at the history, it's actually the other way around. It was us Europeans who always overreacted almost hysterically to economic development. Take the 30s. The crises in late 20s, early 30s also started in the United States of America, and it was much longer and much more severe in the United States of America, yet it led to no war whatsoever. That crisis had to move to Europe for us to start killing each other. It was a self-inflicted war in which we, of course, later on Dutched the whole world. If anybody overreacted, it was Europe, not America. They bit the bullet. Okay, we're going down on our level of consumption, we're losing houses, etc., etc. But that's no reason to shoot somebody just because he has a different color of passport. And interestingly enough, you can see something similar, of course not in that magnitude, but something similar with the crises that we have around, so to speak, today. Again, it started in America. It dwelled there for over a year, almost 2 years. It was more severe there. And yet nobody in the United States of America came with the ingenious plan to break up. We have a crisis. Oh, it must be the fault of this common currency called dollar. Or Japan. Oh my God, it's the end. I told you, it's the end. We should have really kept our regional currencies. I mean, that is an idea that is, as you could see, laughable. 97% of you laughed. The crisis comes to Europe. It first hits Britain, which never used the euro, by the way. And we go like, oh my God, it was the euro. We must get rid of it. And nobody came up with this idea when California was going in a sort of a quasi-bankrupt situation similar to what we had in some European countries. When California was in this situation, nobody came up with a beautiful solution of, oh, let's help California by kicking her out of the dollar zone. That was another idea that nobody actually had, while we Europeans absolutely did. Of course, I understand euro is a new currency. We tend to blame everything on it. But my point is that we Europeans have a tendency to overreact to the economic development, interestingly, much more, I would argue, than America. While we are on the topic of GDP, let me give one last example of this, and then let's move to other topics as well. GDP, so you are students, no, but it will work here also. Think of personal GDP. Personal GDP is your income. How many of you know whether in the year 2013 your personal GDP went up or down? How many of you know? Okay, so that's about maybe fifth. How many of you know exactly by what percentage? Like, I don't know, 2.4. Does anybody know? You don't have to say whether it went up or down. but does anybody know how your personal GDP behaved last year? And I want this to be precise to the 1 decimal point of a percentage point. Anybody? One person. I've asked this question, I would say 20 times, usually to accountants and McKinsey people and Deloitte people and people who actually do accounting. There's never been a single person who knows whether his or her GDP went up by what percentage exactly. Some of them have a rough idea. Mine went up by 10%. I said, no, I don't want by roughly. I want exactly. Nobody, not a single person knows. Is that a very difficult thing to know? Well, no. You just call your tax accountant, assuming that your level of income is reflected by your tax returns. And you basically call him or her, or you look into your tax papers and you take the two numbers and you divide them by each other. I mean, this is not very much of a rocket science. And you will know my income went up by, I don't know, 1.8%. Less than inflation. So, okay. Now, again, what's my point? Why don't we know about our personal income? It's a much more important thing to you than some abstract GDP of Netherlands, which has almost no relevance whatsoever on your personal life. We don't know not because it's difficult to know, but because we don't care. It's really easy to find out. It would take you 5 minutes, maybe 15. The division, you know. But otherwise, it's really, we don't know because we don't care. My question is, what happens between something that actually is important, which is my personal income, which is completely irrelevant, as we could see, to all of us, or we don't follow it in any way exactly, and then some magic happens, this number becomes completely abstract, completely irrelevant GDP of a nation or of a continent, and that number is so important that we are almost ready to break down 50 years of European integration because of that. If that's not religion, then tell me what it is. It appears like, economics, most of you are economists, so, we don't like to be called religious people. But, I mean, you can't help yourself finding these tendencies over things that we fetishize for reasons unknown. So, okay, enough about our GDP. Now, the genius of the founding fathers of the European integration was that they had a goal, and that goal had a means towards that goal. The goal was peace, and the means towards that goal was trade. Trade was what philosophers call a vanishing mediator. It's just there so it gets you somewhere. The purpose of that is only because of the goal. So, you've studied this 10,000 times. The founding idea of European Union is, make trade, not war. Now, when you actually look at it, if you actually take 2 steps back, we have peace. I mean, that is indisputable. And peace is a stationary quality. You either have it or you don't have it, unless, you're talking in some sort of a Buddhist way of, inner peace. That you can, I think, also maximize. But I'm talking about this peace where blood comes out of the body. You either have it or you don't have it. We have peace. So that goal is ticked off, no problem, mission accomplished. You can even say that we have trade, and we have trade. North of Finland trades freely with south of Greece and south of Italy with so little resistance that it's absolutely unheard of in the history of Europe. They have the same currency. They don't use tariffs. Remember, maybe you're too young to remember, some of you. Tariffs is what we did here in Europe when a piece of good left one country. So Maastricht is a nice example. A couple of kilometers here is a mysterious thing called border. And if that one good went from one side of the border to the other side of the border, you had to pay 16% more just because it moved across this thing called border. And we used to do that on a regular basis. So that's another thing. We have peace and we have trade. Absolutely, we have trade. Now, the problem is that peace, as I said, well, problem. Yeah, in a way, it's a problem. Peace is a stationary quality that once you have it, you can no longer maximize it. Unlike trade. Trade you can have, but you can still want more. So instead of this fetish, and that's, again, I'm coming back to the first sentence of my talk, the ingenious idea of the founding fathers of European Union was to swap the fetish of national growth for the fetish of, national growth geographically for the fetish of national growth economically. So we now jumped on this vanishing mediator, we jumped on the means, and we tried to maximize the means. This is, I think, one of the key lessons to take. Yeah, was that a hand? No, okay. This is one of the key things that I maybe want you to remember is that I'm an economist, but I would still say that one of the biggest mistakes of European integration was that we laid all eggs and all meaning and all purpose of European integration into the realm of economic. So United States of America have other reasons for the union, you know, the slaves and freedom and all that. If the economy goes down in United States, nobody thinks of breaking down the union. Whereas here, we Europeans have put so much economic argumentation between European Union is when the economy falters a little bit, we start questioning the whole idea of integration. When I say the word European Union, most people will immediately think of economic integration, which, again, I have nothing against, but the mistake was that we laid all eggs on the wonderful success that we had in economic integration. This is another sort of argument that supports my thesis that we Europeans have fetishized the economic while we try to pretend that we are, you know, really very artsy. Just because you have red trousers does not mean you're artsy. So, what can we do? Well, I think it's time for us to understand that the European Revolution, or the whole idea of European integration, or the whole idea of Europe, if you will, is more than just the sum of our economies. It is more than the bureaucratic advances that we had in the last 50 years, which is absolutely amazingly, I mean, if you think about it, so many nations have agreed on same regulation. That's, to me, a bureaucratic miracle. And by the way, bureaucracy, I don't mean that in a negative word. Bureaucracy is a substitute for war in many respects. And so is diplomacy. So Europe is more than the sum of its economies, the bureaucratic accomplishments, and the maneuver space that the negotiators, as good as they may be, have availed themselves to give in this process. What then shall be the future of Europe? Well, look how, for the first time, and I will end here, I think I have wasted my hour. Oh no, I still have 20 more minutes. Okay. I'm faster than I think. What has happened during this crisis? Well, this is for the first time in the history of Europe that we actually didn't attack each other for it. If Greece or the Greek bankruptcy would happen 3 generations ago, the only thing we, even us very intelligent, blah, blah, all that, artsy Dutch people, would be debating is how should we most effectively attack Greece? Because that's what we always did. There is a country, especially neighboring countries. I mean, Greece is, but you, historically, oh, this is going to be a little bit. Which country do you make jokes about? Of course, Belgium, right. It's always the neighboring country. In America, they make fun of the neighboring states, which is also funny. So, usually in Europe, in the history of Europe, we hated our neighbors. And we wanted and we wished ill for them. And when that nation went down on its knees, economically exhausted in a bankruptcy-like situation, we immediately finished it off. And that's, in fact, what we would have done with Greece or with any other country. I mean, just imagine, I'm going to be a little bit politically incorrect. Just imagine the joy of English people if they would read the news that Ireland is going bankrupt. Or just imagine the joy of Slovaks when they learn that Hungary is bankrupt, etc., etc., etc. This time, that's exactly what we didn't do. This crisis is the first crisis that brought us closer together. We tried to help each other, which still counts, even if that help isn't very helpful. You know, this is the saying that I say to a very clumsy friend of mine: stop trying to help me and help me. So that's what we did. We tried to help Greece. Maybe we didn't, but we tried. And we sincerely, honestly tried to help Greece. And we all wished that Greece would actually start doing better. And when Greece started doing better, this was a cause of joy, which you can see in between the lines of Financial Times. It's still little economic increase in utility. This has never happened before. And you will say, okay, but look, this is a very popular topic, the increase of nationalism brought to you by economic crises. Well, really? Where is, I don't know. You had your nationalists here. You still have them. My point is, you had them way before the whole crisis even started. We in Czech Republic had a nationalist party that was extremely xenophobic, openly anti-Jews, anti-Roma, anti-whatever, anybody who was a little different. But that was in the 90s. They are vanished now. In Slovakia, they had nationalists not even in the parliament, they had them in the government. Again, a pre-crisis notion. Where is, Le Pen was again something that was way before the whole crisis started. And the same thing is true for Austria, was Haida. Huh? Yes, you do. And of course, my point is nationalism did not decrease because of the crisis, but it didn't increase. In other words, my point is we had nationalism way before this whole crisis started. So stupidity is a constant that is very inelastic when it comes to sort of economic development. I think it's an improper reading. Anyway, this is, of course, I like to challenge what you read in the newspapers. I think it's an improper reading to say, because of the crisis, nationalism went up. No, because of the crisis, nationalism stayed constant. I mean, you always have idiots who will blame things on others, whether they're rich or whether they're poor, whether GDP is growing or whether GDP is increasing. On the contrary, you could even argue that Europe is much closer than it was before the crisis started. If I would be talking about federal Europe 10 years ago, people would laugh at me. If I would be talking about common European banking regulation, people would throw things at me and it wouldn't be money. And if I would even talk about having this pan-European debt that we would all share together, like they do in many other countries, people again would, would find that absolutely hilariously unlikely. Today, These are legitimate topics which only talk about the advance in European integration rather than anything else. It was always the dream of European. When I say the word bureaucrat, I don't mean it in a negative term. It was always the dream of European bureaucrats or people who cared for Europe that European issues would be more closer to common people. Well, today, go to the least village in the highest mountain side. People will be sitting there in pubs, drinking their beer, talking about Europe. This has never happened in the history. Of course, they'll be critical, but that's just us Europeans. We will, again, never talk about things if there is no problem with them. Now there is a problem, and now everybody talks about it. And even a lecture, I mean, I remember I would have lectures about European Union in the past. I would have maybe 5 people, including the sound personnel. Today, wherever I come and I talk about Europe, it's a very popular topic that actually people like to come and talk about and debate, and actually it's something that we now suddenly find that it's an important thing. My last point is how would how would the crises look like if we hadn't had euro? Or I could even go a little bit further and be a little bit more extreme. How would the crises look like if we didn't have European integration? So question number 1, would crises visit Europe? Yes, it's a global crisis, started in America, is hitting every country. There's no every continent. There's no reason why Europe should be spared. So we would have the crises here as well, but our reaction would have been different. Of course, this is impossible to say because this is sort of a what-if game, but I can judge, or you can all look into the history, what we as Europeans did whenever a depression came upon us. And like when you are depressed, you have a tendency to sort of, close yourself, and so do the economies. So in the past, whenever a crisis came, you would limit your imports, you would raise tariffs, again, this word that we were happy to forget, luckily. We would have administrative barriers trying to block the import of goods from other countries, and most of all, we would do this thing called devaluation. A lot of people say, well, because of Europe, Greece could not devaluate. Yes, that's exactly why we have euro. Because we have learned from our history that devaluation is a road to hell. Because in English, you know that devaluation is called beggar thy neighbor policy. And that's exactly what it is. Devaluation does not, properly speaking, increase the competitiveness of the devaluating country. It's more appropriate to say that devaluation decreases the competitiveness of your business partners. Because that's what it does. So one country devaluates, this is an old story that the older generation knows very well. Another country devaluates in retaliation, and as a spiral that you end running to the bottom. In other words, the institutions of European integration have prevented us from starting economic warfare. Devaluation, blah, 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 all these things that I've mentioned are not even in the realm of temptation. So when French producers come to Sarkozy or Hollande saying, oh my God, look at the Germans, they are blah, 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 devaluate the franc, please, otherwise we're all dead. Sarkozy or Hollande, I can't. I'd love to. And believe me, I would. But I can't. We have this thing called euro, and there it doesn't, you can't devaluate within the euro. The only way you can devaluate is you stop increasing your wages, which is what Germans did. And so that's, you can do an internal sort of devaluation when it comes to wages, and you can make my day, and that's a little bit difficult for the French. Because we couldn't be even tempted by starting economic warfare, this is also something we have seen cases in history where economic warfare then led to the real bloody warfare where, again, blood came out of human bodies. My last point is, one of my small little things that I like to do with economics is to show how close it is to religion. I've already demonstrated that a little bit when it came to GDP. The behavior we had with Greece was extremely funny in a way, because the dilemma of us Europeans was we didn't know whether Greece is a family or if it's a market. When somebody from your friends or from your family breaks her or his leg, you stop calculating immediately and you run and help them. You don't go, okay, wait a minute. So that's half an hour of my time. My opportunity cost, most of you are economists, right? So you do know the meaning of the word opportunity cost.
Yeah.
So my opportunity cost would be, oh, I forgot interest rates. You actually don't do that. You basically run, you let go of everything, you run to help that person. Because they're family, they're part of something else than economic. Now, when your baker breaks a leg, you go to another one. I mean, it's nothing personal, it's just business. I'm not interested in you as a baker. I'm interested in the bakeries behind you, and it so happens that the most peaceful and easier way for me to get to the bakery is to pay you some money. That's the only role that you play in my life. And if you happen to break your leg and not open that bakery that day, no hard feelings. It's this from this movie Scarface, right? Nothing personal. It's just business, and he shoots the whole gang with them. So this is also, nothing personal. I mean, this is business. That's the whole idea of competition is based on this, that I actually switch. I go to somebody who has bakeries. Now this exactly then, we didn't know what to do with Greece, because Greece was somewhere in between. Is it a market? Do we care about their yogurts? Or what is it exactly that they produce? Or feta cheese, or tourism? Or is it a family? In other words, in the more Christian meaning of the word, who is my neighbor? The Pharisees came to Jesus. Jesus said, they asked him, what's the most important commandment? He said, love your God and love your neighbor. And they immediately came with definitions. Aha, okay, but define neighbor. You get this from some of your teachers, no? Also, just a joke. So Jesus defines this neighbor as a complete stranger, a Samaritan, who they didn't like. And so in the same way, we are asking ourselves this question, is Greece a neighbor or is it a stranger? Now, interestingly enough, the word debt in New Testament Greek, and also actually in Dutch, as much Dutch as I know, the word for debt is the same word you have for sin or for guilt. Yeah? Schulden. Or something like that, yeah. In German, it's Schulden, without the ch. So this is also true in New Testament Greek, ophelon. It's also true in Aramaic, for those of you who speak Aramaic, but it's also true in Latin. Lord's Prayer really goes, forgive us our debts as we forgive those who are indebted to us. This sort of became, a variation of this became the prayer of the Wall Street, where the Wall Street boys came to the American government and said, forgive us our debts as we do not forgive those who are indebted to us. So you can see that you have these 2,000-year-old cryptic texts that we sort of still, prayers that we pray till today. Did you ever realize that this whole theory of invisible hand of the market is really a prayer? We want it to be that way. Oh, I really want for my bad intents to be turned into this public good. It's not a theory, it's a prayer. You should also have, like when you, I don't know, the fundamentalists have a tendency to have a Bible and people, they give different colors to different meanings. So anyway, anytime you read a prayer in your 101 economic textbook, give it a yellow color or something. And you will find that there is actually a lot of it. This is the way we are turning religion into science. Paul Samuelson, this is the book that I studied under, but even the ones that you're doing, I don't know if you're doing still Samuelson or if you're doing some other books, this is the basic trick. In the beginning, you shoot in something completely stupid like there is no such thing as a free lunch, which is stupidity. I mean, I've had so many free lunches. and I mean, all the girlfriends that I had, I gave them free lunches, and all the kids that I had, I gave them free lunches. And when I was a student, I received so many free lunches. I mean, best you can debate this for a long time. Is there such a thing as free lunch or not? But this is not a debate. This is a religious statement. There is no such thing as a free lunch. Anytime you receive a free lunch, they're trying to use you. You live in a cynical world, because I understand, you know, kids, when we are small, we like gifts. That's what kids do. And suddenly you open a textbook in economics and you say, there's no gifts. There's everything that you ever get in your life, you gotta pay for it, one way or another. So you say, okay, well, yeah, you don't even think about it, and you accept it. I live in a cynical world. Anything that appears as a gift isn't truly a gift, it's a bribe in disguise. So that's why 3 pages later, you are able to accept that people are egoists. Which again is a huge topic that we could debate for centuries, and we as mankind have been debating this for centuries. In fact, we've been debating this ever since the Greeks. Are human beings egoistic or not? Well, we don't know, because there are good arguments on one side and there are good arguments on the other side. Comes an economist and says, okay, I will just assume it, yes, they are. You can't do this. You can't legitimately do that unless you're talking religion. So Paul Samuelson, the author of economics, in the beginning, in the introduction, says, in this book, I want to make you think like an economist. So immediately you have to say, okay, fine, which one? Are you talking about Smith? Are you talking about Keynes? Are you talking about Hayek? Are you talking about Marx? Or was Marx not an economist? Well, or are you talking about Veblen? Or which one? And they say, well, you know, this is what they would all agree on. You know, that one thing that if you put Marx and Keynes and Smith and Hayek and Schumpeter into one room, one thing they wouldn't agree on is our introductory textbooks. This is not a common sort of, okay, you know, this is the common wisdom in economics. No. So maybe he should have been more honest, and he should have said, I want you to think like I, Paul Samuelson, think. Because that would be an honest statement. And maybe one more correction, if I may. The word think there, I would think it would be better if I want you to believe, like I believe. I believe there is no such thing as a free lunch. I believe human beings are egoistic. I believe human beings are rational. I believe you can approximate human behavior by very simple mathematics. I believe that economics is much more like physics rather than humanities. And I believe that human beings can order their preferences, which is just a clever way of saying that people know what they want, which is... And with that entry, fine. But not saying, okay. And the way he does it, my last methodological point, the way he does it is he gives you a mathematical proof of something. He goes 2-3 pages over a very small, little, tiny miniature detail in mathematical language, and then he stops and says, oh, but because we know that human beings are free, egoist, utility maximizing individuals, we can continue with the calculations. You know? And then at the end of these, it's a proof, QED. I have scientifically proved that markets are better than government or something. Well, you know, again, why do you filter such a small little mathematical detail and then you smuggle in ethical, religious, philosophical beliefs of your own that you fail to prove. Because it's impossible to prove that human beings are, well, anyway, it would open a whole new debate which we don't have time for. So, anyway, sorry for that. But I'm only doing this because I had a little bit more time than I'm done. Good. All right, so let's do a debate. Thank you.